जय गौरानिताय। All the guests and devotees will get a chance to offer a candle today to their lordships, Shri Shri Radha Damodar Bhagwan. If everybody could please remain seated. Jatin, I need a song sheet. Namameshwaram Satchidanandarupam Lasat Kundalam Gokule Brajmanam. Namameshwaram Satchidanandarupam Lasat Kundalam Gokule Brajmanam. Namameshwaram Satchidanandarupam Lasat Kundalam Gokule Brajmanam. Yashoda Viyolu Kaladavamanam Paramristamatyanta Drut Gopya. Yashoda Viyolu Kaladavamanam Paramristamatyanta Drut Gopya. Yashoda Viyolu Kaladavamanam Paramristamatyanta Drut Gopya. Rudantam Muhurnetra Yugmam Nijantam Karam Bhoja Yugmena Shatankanetram. Yugantam Muhurnetra Yugmam Nijantam Karam Bhoja Yugmena Shatankanetram. Muhushvashakam Patre Rekakakanta Stitagreva Damodaram Bhaktivadham. Iti Drikshvalilabhiranand Kunde Swagosham Nimajantam Akyapayantam. Tadiyeshitagneshu bhakterjitatvam Puna prematashtam sata vriti vande. Tadiyeshitagneshu bhakterjitatvam Varam deva moksham na moksham vadhim va Nachanyam vrineham varishadapiha. Varam पर्जन्यं वृणेऽहं वर्षादपिहा इदं ते वपुर्नाथ गोपालबालं सदा मे मनस्य विरस्तं किमन्ये रक्तश्च गोप्या मुहुष्कुम्भितं बिम्बरक्ताधरं मे मानस्य विरष्टम् आलं लक्षलभ्ये विरष्टम् आलं लक्षलभ्ये नमो देव दामोदर अनन्त विष्णु प्रसीद प्रभु दुःख जलधिमग्नम् नमो देव दामोदर अनन्त विष्णु प्रसीद प्रभु दुःख नमो देव दामोदर अनन्त विष्णु प्रसीद प्रभु दुःख जलधिमग्नम् दृष्टिवृष्याति दिनं वतानो गृहाणे क्षमामग्नं यद्यक्षि दृश्या कुबेरात्मजो बाधा मूर्ते भयाद्वात् चितो भक्ति भजो कृतो च तथा प्रेम भक्तिं स्वकं मे प्रयाचा न मोक्षे ग्रहो मेस्ति दामोदरेहा स्वकं मे प्रयाचा न मोक्षे ग्रहो मेस्ति दामोदरेहा नमस्ते स्तु दाम्ने स्फुरदीप्तिधाम्ने त्वदीयोदरायाथा विश्वास्य धाम्ने नमो राधिकाये त्वदीयाय प्रियाये नमो नन्तलीलाय देवाय तुभ्यम् Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Bolo bolo. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Radha, Damodar Radha, Damodar Radha. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gora Hari Bol. Jai Govinda, Jai Gopal, Keshav Madhav Deen Dayal. 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 Deen Dayal, Deen Dayal, Deen Dayal, Deen Dayal. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Supreme Lord, whose form is the embodiment of eternal existence, knowledge and bliss, whose shark-shaped earrings are swinging to and fro, and who is beautifully shining in the divine realm of Gokula, who, due to the offense of breaking the pot of yogurt that his mother was churning into butter, and then stealing the butter that was kept hanging from a swing, is quickly running from the wooden grinding mortar in fear of Mother Yashoda, but who has been caught from behind by her, who ran after him with greater speed. To that Supreme Lord, Sri Damodar, I offer my humble obeisances. Seeing the whipping stick in his mother's hand, he is crying and rubbing his eyes, Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda Bhagwan ki jai, Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman ki jai, Shri Shri Yashoda Damodar Bhagwan ki jai, Goranitai Bhagwan ki jai, Giri Govardhan ki jai, Shila Prabhupada ki jai. He is crying and rubbing his eyes again and again with his two lotus hands. His eyes are filled with fear, and the necklace of pearls around his neck, which is marked with 3 lines like a conch shell, is shaking because of his quick breathing due to crying. To this Supreme Lord, Sri Damodar, whose belly is bound not with ropes, but by his mother's pure love, I offer my humble obeisances. By such childhood pastimes as this, he is drowning the inhabitants of Gokula in pools of ecstasy and revealing to those devotees who are absorbed in knowledge of his supreme majesty and opulence that he is only conquered by devotees whose pure love is imbued with intimacy and is free from all conceptions of awe and reverence. With great love again, I offer my obeisances to Lord Damodar hundreds and hundreds of times. O Lord, although you are able to give all kinds of benedictions, I do not pray to you for the boon of impersonal liberation, nor the highest liberation of eternal life in Vaikuntha, nor any other boon which may be obtained by executing the 9 processes of bhakti. O Lord, I simply wish that this form of yours, as Balagopala in Vrindavan, may ever be manifest in my heart. For what is the use to me of any other boon besides this? O Lord, your lotus face, which is encircled by locks of soft black hair tinged with red, is kissed again and again by Mother Yashoda, and your lips are reddish like the bimba fruit. May this beautiful vision of your lotus face be ever manifest in my heart. Thousands and thousands of other benedictions are of no use to me. O Supreme Godhead, I offer my obeisances unto you. O Damodar, O Ananta, O Vishnu, O Master, O my Lord, be pleased upon me. By showering your glance of mercy upon me, deliver this poor ignorant fool who is immersed in an ocean of worldly sorrows and become visible to my eyes. O Lord Damodar, just as the 2 sons of Kuvera, Manigriva and Nalakuvara, were delivered from the curse of Narada and made into great devotees by you in your form as a baby tied with a rope to a wooden grinding mortar. In that same way, please give me your own Prema Bhakti. I long for this and have no desire for any kind of liberation. O Lord Damodar, I first of all offer my obeisances to the brilliantly effulgent rope which binds your belly. I then offer my obeisances to your belly, which is the abode of the entire universe. I humbly bow down to your most beloved Srimati Radharani, and I offer all obeisances to you, the Supreme Lord, who displays unlimited pastimes. Shri Shri Radha Damodar Bhagwan ki Jai, Yashoda Damodar Bhagwan ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Nrsimhadev Bhagwan ki Jai, Bhaktivedanta Maharaj ki
Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Praladhaladhadhaine Praladhaladhadhaine Hiranyakashipurvakshaha Hiranyakashipurvakshaha Shilatankanakaraye Shilatankanakaraye Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha Yato Yato Yamitato Narsimha Yato Yato Yamitato Narsimha Bahe Narsimha Ridhaye Narsimha Bahe Narsimha Ridhaye Narsimha Narasimha Madhim Sharanam Prabhadhe Narasimha Madhim Sharanam Prabhadhe Avakara Kamala Bhaire Naga Madhuta Singha Dhalita Hiranyakashipu Tano Bringha Keshavadhirta Naira Hari Rupa Jai Jai Jagadish Hare Jaya Jagadish Hare Jaya Jagadish Hare Keshavhadirta Naira Hari Rupa Jaya Jagadish Hare Jaya Jagadish Hare Jaya Jagadish Hare Narsimhadev, 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 Jaya Narsimhadev. Jaya Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Jaya Prahlad Maharaj. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Nittai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nittai Gaura Haribo.
भगवान की
जय
प्रहलाद महाराज की
जय
श्रीला प्रभुपाद की जय
Thank you so much for coming to Bhaktivedanta Manor tonight. For those of you that want to stay on, I believe there will be a small class right now, and then that will be followed by 9 p.m. Arti. Hare Krishna. Shilpa Haribo, how are you? Are there any candles there? Haribo, how are you? Are there?
Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Ramadhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yasodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yasodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yasodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Nana Vraja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Gaura Premanandi. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paribharajakacharya Satar Sata Shishimad. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the Assembled devotees. All glories to the Assembled devotees. All glories to the devotees. Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Hare Krishna. So this evening, I believe we're reading from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, text 28, I believe. Oh, chapter 7, verse 28. There's a few copies on the windowsill. So, chapter 7, text 28. Thanks, man. So I'll read the Sanskrit, and anyway, if you feel comfortable, you can respond. Yesham tvantagatam papam. Yesham tvantagatam papam. Jananam punya karmanam. Jananam punya karmanam. Te dvandva moha nirmukta. Te dvandva moha nirmukta. Bhajante mam drida vrataha. Bhajante mam drida vrataha. Yesham tvantagatam papam. Jananam punya karmanam. Te dvandva moha nirmukta. Bhajante mam drida vrataha. Anybody like to try, or yeah? Yesham tvantagatam papam. Jananam punya karmanam. Te dvandva moha nirmukta. Bhajante mam drida vrataha. Yesham tvantagatam papam. Jananam punya karmanam. Te dvandva moha nirmukta. Bhajante mam drida vrataha. Hare Krishna. No. Oh, yeah, have a go, yeah. Sure. Yesham tvantagatam papam. Jananam punya karmanam. Te dvandva moha nirmukta. Vajante mam drida vrataha. That's okay. Vishaka? Okay, so we'll read the word-for-word translation then. Yesham, whose, tu, but, antagatam, completely eradicated, papam, sin, jananam, of the persons, punya, pious, karmanam, whose previous activities, they, dvandva, of duality, moha, delusion, nirmuktaha, free from, bhajante, engage in devotional service, mam, to me, dridha vrataha, with determination. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, and whose sinful actions are completely eradicated, are freed from the dualities of delusion, and they engage themselves in my service with determination. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Those eligible for elevation to the transcendental position are mentioned in this verse. For those who are sinful, atheistic, foolish, and deceitful, it is very difficult to transcend the duality of desire and hate. Only those who have passed their lives in practicing the regulative principles of religion, who have acted piously, and who have conquered sinful reactions, can accept devotional service and gradually rise to the pure knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then, gradually, they can meditate in trance on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the process of being situated on the spiritual platform. This elevation is possible in Krishna consciousness in the association of pure devotees, for in the association of great devotees, one can be delivered from delusion. It is stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam 5.5.2 that if one actually wants to be liberated, he must render service to the devotees. Mahatsevam dwaram ahur bimuktehe. But one who associates with materialistic people is on the path leading to the darkest region of existence. Tamodwaram yoshitam sangi sangam. All the devotees of the Lord traverse this earth just to recover the conditioned souls from their delusion. The impersonalists do not know that forgetting their constitutional position as subordinate to the Supreme Lord is the greatest violation of God's law. Unless one is reinstated in his own constitutional position, it is not possible to understand the Supreme Personality or to be fully engaged in his transcendental loving service with determination. Om Agyanatam Randasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Yesham tvantikatam papam jananam punyakarmanam te dvandva mohanirmukta bhajante mandrida vrataha. Persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, and whose sinful actions are completely eradicated, are freed from the dualities of delusion, and they engage themselves in my service with determination. So, Bhagavad Gita, I guess everyone's familiar with Bhagavad Gita now, to some degree, a little, yeah? So it's a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. So it's explained like that at the end of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says that one who studies this sacred conversation of ours, he transcends the miseries of the material world. Essentially, he worships me with his intelligence, is what Krishna says. I'll try and find the verse. Yeah. So in chapter 18, at the end, chapter 18, text 70, and I declare that he who studies this sacred conversation of ours worships me by his intelligence. So the reason I'm saying is, in a conversation, there's a certain flow, isn't it? You know, so sometimes people take pieces out of a book, and they'll try to understand it in isolation. But if I'm having a conversation with you, and somebody takes one sentence of that conversation and puts it in a newspaper and says, "Look what he said," it happens all the time, doesn't it? That people get quoted out of context. So, in order to understand the Bhagavad Gita, we have to understand the whole Bhagavad Gita. So there's a lot behind it. There's the whole situation behind it, and the message which Krishna is trying to communicate to Arjuna. And in that verse, the word for conversation in Sanskrit is called samvadam. Samvada. And samvada, in the Sanskrit language, sam means together, and vada means to speak. So the word for conversation, samvada, means you're speaking together. That's which is essentially what a conversation is. So it's interesting that in the whole history of spiritual realization, throughout history, there have been various people who have become self-realized, isn't it? And they become very famous on account of their self-realization. So you could say Jesus Christ was a good example of a self-realized person. So was Jesus a Christian, for example? Well, he wasn't, was he? Because it didn't, Christian means to follow him. So you'll find there's actually a lot of evidence to show that, I think it's quite commonly known now, between the age of about 13 and the age of about 30, there's not a lot of description in the Bible given to what Jesus was doing during those times. There's a lot of description of his childhood, and then there's a lot of description of his preaching activities. I think he left this world when he was 33, I think. So that middle bit, there's a lot of evidence to show that he traveled east, towards India specifically. And a lot of the philosophy that he presented is the same philosophy that we find in the Bhagavad Gita. So the tradition throughout spiritual culture is that in order to have this experience of self-realization, what you find is you'll have this thing called samvada, which is a conversation between two people. Generally speaking, it's the guru and the disciple. So that's why it's recommended that somebody who's interested in spiritual consciousness, who's interested in self-realization, it's stressed very, very strongly that you should try to seek out a spiritual master, a guru. So, because everybody is different, therefore there are different gurus presenting the truth in different ways for different people at different times. It's not like one size fits all. Like even I was watching one documentary some time ago that there was a practitioner of Buddhism, and he was interested in Chinese, a particular, let's say, branch of Buddhism, Chinese traditional Buddhism. He's Canadian. So in Canada, he learned Cantonese or Mandarin, I'm not sure which language, but whichever language he wanted to study this tradition in, he learned that language, and he went to China, to a very remote place where there were hermit monks practicing Buddhism. And he asked one question to one of these monks, who you can tell they're very, very advanced personalities by their speech, you can tell. And he asked him the question. He said, if you're living in a community and you come across some difficulties in your practice, you can ask people for advice. But if you're living in the middle of nowhere on your own, and you come across some obstacles it's all within yourself, isn't it? The obstacles are all within ourselves when we're practicing, spiritual consciousness. He says, so who do you approach for help, And he says, well, in the texts, in the Shastra, because that question came up this morning, I believe, in the class. What books do the Buddhists use? It's quite a broad thing, but every tradition has their texts, has their specific books, which are coming in a lineage of teachers from a very remote time. So he said the answers are in the books. You can consult the books, but the thing is, it takes some level of advancement to be able to know what message in the books is for me and what message is for someone else. Because the way I'm using the example of Buddhism because Buddhism has this reputation, if you like, that it's almost like one size fits all. You sit and you're quiet, and then when you attain peacefulness, then enlightenment comes, So that's the kind of, But actually that's not the case. Because even within the discipline of Buddhism, the explanation is given that because there are so many individuals, that means there are so many individual diseases. So the guru is like a doctor. He prescribes a particular medicine for a particular illness to a particular person. So you don't find that so much in Western medicine. It's more like one size fits all. Antibiotics. Yeah.
It's more like a lifestyle prescription when to get more fitness.
Yeah.
A lifestyle change needs to be made, and then you can transcend that. The doctor can give you the medication.
Well, the doctor will give you the medication in order to get to that level, and also afterwards as well. Yeah. So my point is that's the same in all disciplines, But even in a discipline like Buddhism, which has a bit of a reputation, it's an unfounded reputation that it's just like it's just a one size fits all. But even in their discipline, they accept that everybody has a unique position. So this idea of seeking out a guru is a very individual process. Because a self-realized spiritual master can give instructions to a sincere disciple, but it's also a personal relationship. The disciple has to be able to surrender to the guru, and if you can't surrender to the guru, Srila Prabhupada said this actually, if you can't surrender to the guru, then you shouldn't waste time, because you don't get any effect without a surrender. You have to have a surrendered attitude. If you don't have a surrendered attitude, you won't have any effect. So if you approach a person, and if you don't have that feeling that I'm able to surrender here, then Prabhupada says, don't waste time there. Go find someone else who you can surrender. So it's not that people are being forced to surrender. It's a completely voluntary thing. If you don't want to surrender, you don't have to surrender. But the instruction is given that if you don't approach with this submissive mood, then you can't even make any progress. Which is pretty much the case for even in material life, isn't it? Like if you approach a music teacher, for example, or a football coach, or anything, you have to accept, well, this person knows and I don't know, so therefore I'll try and, what did they say, empty my cup. I'll try and become a blank slate, and if you tell me what I should do, and then I'll do that, and then that's how we learn, But if you go in with the attitude that, well, testing you out, obviously you have to test to see if the person is qualified, but if we go with an arrogant attitude, then we won't actually make any particular advancement. So this idea of what's happening between Krishna and Arjuna, it's a conversation they're having, There's a to and fro. Krishna is giving certain instructions. Arjuna is asking various questions for clarification. Some questions are quite challenging. He's saying, well, I don't know if I agree with this. And Krishna is giving more solid reasons, So, the particular section we're dealing with now actually begins at around verse 14 of chapter 7, wherein, or shall we say, text 15, wherein Krishna explains that there are 4 types of people for whom this mood of surrender will never happen. They don't have this mood of surrender, which is those who are, the translation is, those who are grossly foolish, who are lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons. Those miscreants do not surrender unto me, Krishna says. So very briefly, that means those who consider that by working hard, I will get what I want in this world. You'll find those people won't surrender to, we call it surrender. Those people won't even be interested in spiritual consciousness, because they think, well, by my hard effort, I'll get what I want. So they're not interested in any kind of spirituality or subtle, they're not interested in trying to understand the subtleness behind existence. Then the lowest among mankind means those who follow basically very sinful mode of lifestyle. You also see, like, if somebody's, just absorbed in, shall we say, intoxication, enjoying meat eating, gambling, chasing after sex life, these things. What we do find is that a lot of spiritually minded people get involved in these things, but at a certain point, the frustration of it just becomes so frustrating that they say, you can see, this is not satisfying me. There must be something else to my existence. But for somebody who's got faith in that process, you'll find they also won't be interested in spiritual life. And then those whose knowledge is stolen by illusion means you get people with very, very big brains, but that's their problem, Like I was listening to something yesterday. There was a guy talking about the Big Bang and his new model for the Big Bang theory and the evolution of the universe, and it was quite funny to listen to, because so many times, I lost count of how many times he said, well, maybe, and we think, and I'm thinking, it's clear you don't know. You know what I mean? It's clear that you don't know. But you think, So I think as well, what value has that got? You think that, I think this. But because he's really super intelligent guy, his faith is in his own intelligence to work things out. So I don't know yet, but, we're making progress. But it's really comical, actually, because like Prabhupada used to say, there's these classes and morning walks, recordings from Prabhupada. This is like back in 1970. And they used to talk about the science of gerontology, which is the science of reversing old age, And they were saying it was a relatively new science at the time. Through scientific advancement, we're going to stop the aging process of the body. Because why does the body age anyway? Isn't it? Because all the cells in the body regenerate, isn't it? Everybody, I think, that's common knowledge. So all the different cells, over the course of 7 years, they say, all of the cells in your body have regenerated. That's a common thing, isn't it? People know. So that means that all the cells in your body are constantly becoming new. So if all the little bits that make up our body are all becoming new, then why is the body becoming old? Isn't it? You know what I mean? Like the skin, it sags and it goes wrinkly, doesn't it, over time? But all the skin cells are constantly being regenerated into new cells. So if the cells are new, then why is the skin looking old, So nobody can actually answer the question. So these gerontologists, we're going to find out and we're going to stop this old age process. And the funny thing was, I heard it, the first time I heard it was when Prabhupada was talking about it in 1970. And some time ago, I came across it on YouTube. And there was a guy very recently talking, and he was a gerontologist. And he was talking about all the advancement they made in this science. But he was really old, you know. He was a real old-looking guy. He was bald and wrinkly, and he couldn't stand up straight. And he's talking about this science that we're going to reverse, you know, the process of old age. And I thought, clearly you're not being very successful, you know, unless he's like just giving the medicine to everyone else and not taking it himself. So the joke of it is that because they're so intelligent, they think that that's going to solve all their problems. But anybody who steps back a little and looks objectively can see that they're actually just caught up in illusion, because they don't have the answers, you know. So what's the value of a load of knowledge that doesn't actually give you any answers? It hasn't actually got any value. So you'll find also that they won't be interested in the spiritual side of things, because their faith is in material knowledge. And asuram, then asuram bhava mashritaha, means those who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, which means people who openly declare, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in any spirituality, I don't believe there's anything beyond the body. You'll find that they're also not interested, because they say very clearly they're not interested. But then after that verse, Krishna explains that there are 4 types of people who will begin to take an interest. You know, 4 types of pious people who begin to take an interest, which is the distressed, the desire of wealth, the inquisitive, and he who is searching for knowledge of the Absolute. And then over the following verses, Krishna goes into it in more and more detail about the process that these people take in order to make advancement in spirituality, in Krishna consciousness. And then moving towards the end of the chapter, he's wrapping up. So today's verse, he's wrapping up the statements that he's already made. Which again, it's a natural sequence in conversations, isn't it? Like, definitely in philosophical conversations. What happens usually is somebody will make a statement, and then they'll go through the explanation of that statement, and then they'll make a conclusion, which is like repeating the statement. So you might say, you know, the scientists are just an illusion, let's say, you know. And someone will say, what do you mean by that? So they say, well, the reason is because, you know, they're talking all these things, but they don't have specific evidence, and, you know, like everything we've just been talking about now. And then for all of those reasons, that's why I say scientists are, you know, in illusion. So you begin with your statement, and then you prove your statement, and then you conclude with the same statement. So that's the format that actually Krishna takes. You'll find that and all spiritual teachers take that format, you know? You know what I mean? Like, you might say, you're not the body. And somebody say, what? And you go, well, if you think about it, like, this is the hand. If I cut the hand off, I still exist, you know? If I cut any part of my body off, I still exist. But then you can say, well, if I cut the head off, I don't exist. But by perception, I can perceive that there is a thing called the head. I can perceive that there's a thing called the mind. So by the very fact of being able to perceive a thing, that means I'm not that thing, you know. So I must be the perceiver. I'm the one who can perceive the body. I'm the one who perceives the mind. Therefore I say, you're not the body. That's the format of how, that's how gurus speak when they're giving knowledge, you know. Yeah. Improve it, yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you can prove by inference, sometimes you prove by negative connotation. So yeah. So then today's verse is a really cool verse actually. When we dissect what Krishna is saying, it's amazing. It's actually amazing. And one of the reasons why it's amazing is because Krishna is amazing. Krishna means the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the all-pervading, supreme, attractive Lord and controller of all existence. So he's amazing in himself. But because Krishna has a particular quality which we don't have in this material world, and that quality is that everything related to Krishna is of the same spiritual quality as Krishna. So Krishna's name is identical with Krishna. Krishna's form is identical with Krishna. Krishna's knowledge is identical with Krishna. So when we study Krishna's knowledge, we get a taste for Krishna himself, because he's non-different. And in the same way that nobody can understand the Supreme, nobody can actually understand the knowledge that Krishna gives. But by connection with that knowledge, we attain the same quality as that knowledge. And that quality is eternity, knowledge, and blissfulness. So that's why by coming in contact with this knowledge, like with these books, they're not ordinary books, you know, because by absorbing ourselves in these books, suddenly we find ourselves becoming very peaceful, find ourselves becoming more aware of our existence, find ourselves naturally having an understanding of our life, and becoming very happy also. Like someone said to me, when I was going through teenage years and early 20s and that type of thing, I was suffering a lot, you know. But when I was analysing my life, there wasn't anything in particular, you know. I didn't live in Syria and have a bomb dropped on my house, you know. I grew up in Ireland. I didn't even grow up in Northern Ireland where people were getting killed all the time. It was quite a peaceful, normal, ordinary existence I had. But I was suffering so much. I just couldn't figure out why. And then one devotee one day, he was given a class, and he said, you may be suffering because of this reason, you may be suffering because of that reason, or you may be just suffering because of ignorance. He just said it in passing, you know. And I thought it was like a light bulb moment, you know. It's just suffering because of ignorance, you know. So, because we're in ignorance, personally, I was in ignorance of my existence. That ignorance causes suffering. The two things are just connected, you know. You know what I mean? Like if you stand in the rain, you get wet, isn't it? Like water and wetness, they're not exactly the same thing, isn't it? Because if you look at water's got a surface tension to it, isn't it? So that's why the top of a glass of water, it doesn't just dissolve into the air. It's got a surface. So if you become covered in water, each water droplet has a little, you know, it's got a little surface around it. But because of the presence of the water, you're wet. You know? So the two things are connected. The water and the wetness are connected intrinsically. You can't separate them. Similarly, ignorance and suffering, they're connected like this. You cannot separate them. If you're in ignorance, you're suffering. Because the two things are, they call it intrinsic, where two things cannot be separated. Like heat and fire is another thing. Like what's fire? If fire means heat and light, isn't it? But heat is not fire, specifically. Light is not fire. So fire is distinct from heat and light. But fire has no existence except for heat and light, isn't it? Like, if there's no heat and there's no light, it's not fire, you know? But at the same time, heat and light doesn't mean it's fire. They're not the same thing, but they're intrinsically connected. So the problem is, in the material world, our ignorance causes us to disconnect things and try and make things separate. So this idea of trying to make things separate is what causes suffering. Yeah.
So you know suffering?
Yeah.
If you take the example of fire, if there's no ignorance, but there's knowledge, say for the devotee, can they still go through suffering? If so, what's the reason?
No, if there's knowledge, there won't be suffering. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, from knowledge, they call them modes of nature, is the way Krishna says. So in the mode of goodness, there's knowledge and there's happiness. Mode of ignorance is suffering. Were you going to... Sorry. Yeah. That's right, yeah, that's correct. But there is a transition phase. Because you have someone who's not a devotee, and you have someone who's a devotee, and then you have people like us who are not really happy being not a devotee, let's say. So then we're trying to move towards, but there's a transition phase. So you will find that for a practicing devotee, sometimes there's suffering. But the suffering is different. Is always, it's like it's raining outside, but you got an umbrella, you know. Whereas without bhakti, without Krishna consciousness, you got no umbrella, you know. It's like it's raw suffering just for the sake of it. At least for a devotee, your suffering acts as an impetus to make you more serious about questioning, who am I? What's my function? Whereas if we don't have that tendency to ask that question, then it's just, you're suffering and there's no benefit. Yeah.
She was asking for more suffering.
Well, yeah.
She's a devotee.
We're not asking for
Yeah. There's difference, yeah.
You spoke about the intrinsic quality
Yeah.
being separate. Could you sit down? I kind of get the gist of the understanding.
So, actually there's only one thing that exists, and that's Krishna. Now Krishna obviously is not sectarian. Krishna means the supreme absolute truth exists. So, one aspect of the supreme truth is that certain living entities are in illusion. Now that illusion is also imposed by the truth. Let's say by Krishna. So Krishna subjects certain living entities to illusion. And the result of that illusion is that they think there are things which are separate from Krishna. But in actual fact, there's nothing separate from Krishna. You know? So that's it's like the example of the heat and the fire. They use that. Or the sun and the sunlight. You can try and understand that the sunlight is separate from the sun, but actually it's not. You know? So material consciousness means you see things separately. So you're you and I'm me, and we're two different people. You know, that's what we think. But what Krishna is saying is no, because there's spirit soul in you, the spirit soul in me. The super soul is in you, super soul is in me. So the same super soul is in both of us. Therefore, there's no distinction. You know, there's a connection between us. You know, and that's the same for. I mean, let's take another example. I heard one nice way to explain it, like how everything is connected. Now, I was born because my mother and my father got married, and you know, following nature's way, children came. So I wouldn't exist if it wasn't for them. They wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the grandparents, etc., etc. None of that could have happened if the Earth wasn't in rotation around the sun. And that couldn't have happened if the galaxy wasn't structured accordingly. And that couldn't have happened unless the whole universe was structured in a certain way. So because of the structure of the universe, every tiny little thing that's happening is happening. But what we do materially is we try and take things and understand it in isolation. But that's not possible. And that's the mistake. That's the mistake of science. And they've actually come across this. I don't know if anyone's studied any quantum physics. So basically you've got classical Newtonian physics, which has a whole load of laws which describe everyday objects all the way up to planets and, you know, large objects. But then you find that when you try and apply those laws to subatomic particles, those laws don't work. So they have different laws, which is the laws of quantum physics, which work for the subatomic particles, but those laws of quantum physics don't work for the big stuff. So how is it that the big stuff is made of the small stuff, but the laws for the small stuff doesn't work for the big stuff, and the laws for the big stuff don't work for the small stuff? So there's a guy called Stephen Hawking, who's a famous, he's the one who was in the wheelchair, like considered a massive genius, and he's dedicated his life to trying to fuse these theories together, the universal law of everything. Spent his whole life doing it, and he failed. He couldn't do it. And one aspect of the quantum physics is because if I observe, like if you throw a rock from here to there and I observe it, my observing that does not affect the thing. Whereas when you observe the subatomic particles, the very fact of you observing it changes the thing that you're looking at. Like even on a practical sense, like you have to shine a light on it, so the little particle of light, when it bounces off that electron, it moves the electron. And then it takes time for the light to come back into your eye, so then you don't really know where that electron was, because in order to try and see it, you've moved it.
Is that like Schrödinger's?
All that Schrödinger's cat and all that, yeah. So this is the conundrum. So what the problem is, in everyday terms, I can be the observer of a universe that's separate from me. That's what it means, right? But when you get down to the very tiny structure of the universe, in order for me to observe it, I have to acknowledge that I'm part of the thing that I'm trying to observe, and therefore I cannot observe it as separate from me because I'm part of it, Which is what throws them all out of sync. Because that's the scientific method, is to think, yes, I am the observer of the world. I am the enjoyer. I am the controller. I am the one who is studying this business. But what we don't realize is that we're part of the thing that's being studied. And that's the whole problem. And that's the whole difference between spirituality, let's say Krishna consciousness, and material consciousness. Material consciousness means I'm the observer of the world. Spiritual consciousness means I'm the object of Krishna's vision. And that's the difference. And the reason that everybody suffers in the material world is because material consciousness is false, as is proved by this quantum physics idea, that we're part of the thing. We're not the observer. We're not the important person who's observing the world. We're a part of the world which is functioning according to the will of someone else. And it's that personality is the important feature. And the universe functions for his will, his satisfaction, his pleasure, whatever reason he had to make the whole thing. And by cultivating that consciousness, that's Krishna consciousness, is that I'm an object of Krishna's pleasure. By cultivating that consciousness, you find automatically that a person becomes happy, peaceful, and enlightened. Because that's his natural position. Which is what Prabhupada actually mentions that in the purport. He says that, towards the end, the last sentence actually, unless one is reinstated in his own constitutional position, it is not possible to understand the Supreme Personality or to be fully engaged in his transcendental loving service with determination. So unless we accept this position that I'm the object of his vision, it's not possible for me to be in my actual position. And without being situated in my actual position, I can never be peaceful. Can never be happy, isn't it? Because that's the whole thing. Even in the modern age, they know you have to be yourself, isn't it? Which is great, but you have to know who you are first. Because how can you be yourself if you don't know who you are? So what is my function? Like, who am I? So we're not the body, we're spiritual beings. What is my function as a spiritual being? My function as a spiritual being is to be in connection with the Supreme Spiritual Being. That's the sum and substance. And then the details of it all just becomes apparent. Like you were saying, with the Buddhist saying that first you get to a state of, goodness and that, and then, So the messy bit is in the beginning, But once you get a foothold into spiritual consciousness, then things become more smooth,